Morning, everybody. Nice to see everybody on this old gold session. This is a yellow tea. Last week we did Siren Song, so I want you to get your notes out from Siren Song because the tea you taste today will be distinctly different. And we'll talk about those differences as we go through the session today. What's it been like at Sophie's this week? Well, one of the most important things it's been like this week is we've received the first of what we expect to be 3 large shipments of tea. There are a bunch of boxes in the back of the shop, and we are so happy that they're here rather than in somebody's custom house or in somebody's truck or on some airplane. They're here at Sophie's. So that's the really, really good news about what's happened this week. Now, last week, as Siren Song was closing, you do remember that I had forgotten one of the steps. I brought it up at the end, but let's go through the steps of yellow tea again. It's not so much I forgot it. It's more that sometimes when you're doing yellow tea, not when you are doing yellow tea, but when a farmer is doing yellow tea, they combine the denaturing the enzyme step with the rolling step. But most of the time, that's not the case. So let's go again through these steps. You pick the tea leaves, you wither. After you wither, you usually use a wok and heat the leaves up to sufficient temperature to denature the oxidation enzyme, and then you roll. And then you have a step which is called suffocating the yellow or sealing the yellow. You get a bunch of weird translations. We'll talk about this step more today because what's understood and what's not understood about this step are important for you to have a grasp of, because I noticed in perusing the encyclopedia that we all rely on called the internet, that apparently there are some explanations which could use some revision. So we'll talk about some revision for some of those explanations, and it mostly has to do with this so-called sealing the yellow. All right, and at the end, then you dry the tea. And there's various ways to dry the tea. You usually bake it so that you can put it to market and it won't mold. So those are the steps. You notice 2 things this morning. I sent you an email early this morning. Hope you noticed that. If you haven't noticed it, it's worth you looking right now because there's a map in that email. And that map is a map of Hunan province. And if you look at the upper right quadrant, there's a place called Yueyang, Y-U-E-Y-A-N-G. And you see there's a bunch of blue around it. And in the middle of that blue, there's something called Dongting Lake, D-O-N-G-T-I-N-G-L-A-K-E. So you have this enormous lake there, and that's where Junshan Island is. So that's the first thing I wanted to really point out to you via that map. I also want, because we're going to talk about Yueyang today, I wanted you to know where that is, and it's right there next to the lake. It is, let me think about this. It takes 45 minutes to an hour from the center of Yueyang to drive all the way out to Junshan Island. So it is right there, very, very close. Yueyang, it's a historically famous city in China. Poets during the Tang Dynasty and Sung Dynasty often wrote about the beauty of this place. Tea culture was rich in this place. Tea from Junshan Island and Yueyang was already being sent to the emperor during the Tang Dynasty. Oh, let's place ourselves. Where's the Tang Dynasty? Well, it's in China. But when is the Tang Dynasty? It's from around 618 to about 960. I may have gotten those dates off by a few years, but that's the rough scope of the Tang Dynasty. From a historic perspective, the Tang Dynasty was really culturally, scientifically, the most advanced, the richest of the dynasties. That doesn't mean that other dynasties weren't really, really important. They were, but from a literature standpoint, from a Taoism standpoint, from a Buddhism standpoint, lots of developments were going on during the Tang Dynasty. Also, from an acceptance of other cultures, this was the best time to be in China. Why is that? Well, it's a complicated picture, but part of that picture is the Silk Road. So the Silk Road is running across Central Asia, coming up from the Middle East, and the endpoint of that is a place called Chang'an. Today, we call Chang'an Xi'an, Xian. At that time, it was the capital of China, and that's where the Tang emperors lived. And so you had all these peoples from all over the world showing up and selling spices, buying Chinese goods and taking them back to wherever they started or selling them along the way. And China at that time not only accepted all these people, at some point, these people became integrated within society. So one of the very famous premiers in Chinese history was Turkic in origin. The most famous general during the Tang Dynasty was Korean in origin. So you had this openness of other cultures, this openness to get new knowledge and share the knowledge. And again, the Taoism and the Buddhism ferment created this big old interest in science. Now, wait a minute. Taoism created an interest in science? Isn't Taoism a religion? Not exactly. It's more a philosophy. And part of what Taoists wanted to do was create an elixir of life that preserved life forever. So how were they doing this? They were experimenting with all sorts of minerals. They were experimenting with plants. And so you had cataloging of plants, you had cataloging of minerals, and obviously as they experimented, some of the experiments went spectacularly wrong. So those got marked as do not use again, that type of situation. So it was a really interesting time to be alive in China. The Tang Dynasty was relatively rich. So this is when the tea from the Junshan and Yueyang area started showing up at the capital in Xi'an. So for a long time then, has been famous. So I ask you this. When they sent it, who's the they here? When the farmers and the officials from Yueyang and Junshan sent the tea to the emperor, were they sending him yellow tea? This is obviously a trick question, and the answer is no. Because yellow tea, the process of yellow tea hadn't been invented. So when was it invented? We don't know the exact year, but we know it was probably during the Qing Dynasty. Oh, I better give you some years. Roughly between 1644, and it was probably invented closer to between 750, actually 775, and the year 800. A very complex and different process than the other process. Yes?
Does all yellow tea in cake form need to be rinsed?
Does all yellow tea in cake form need to be rinsed is the question, and the answer is no. So for This particular one, there's two reasons for the rinsing. And I'm getting ahead of myself, but the question is a good question. So let's jump ahead, because I know the question is to try and stimulate my thirst in my mouth so that we can get started. And it's working, because I'm tasting what you're about to taste in a minute. So why again are we rinsing? So you remember, when you look at it, it's a little round. That is, it's compressed in a little round shape, almost like a hat. So one of the things we'd like you to do, if you can do it, is to actually break it in half. If it doesn't break in half for you, don't worry. Cut it or use an ice pick and kind of split it apart. And if worse comes to worse, and none of that works, here's what you can do. 200-degree water, and remember, you're going to have 200-degree water anyway. And instead of a 5-second rinse, you'll do a 20 to 30-second rinse. So that's the fallback position if you can't really get it apart. When you're working with a cake like Golden Disc, which we also sell here, and which comes from that same relative region, you can act, it's light enough, not light enough, but not compressed enough that you can actually break it off easily. And that's why there's a difference. Yes.
What drove the development of the tea cake? Preservation, ease of transport, impact on flavor, aesthetics, all of the above?
So what this commentator asked drove the development of it in cake form? Several things. First, it is easier to transport. And for the large cakes, that was really important as they were producing and then sending out. It was just easier to transport the cakes. Later, though, the large cakes became ceremonial and they became gifts. And so the result is they were packaged in a fancy way, and so they were really convenient and easy gifts to give. Remembering, of course, that yellow tea, at no time in China was there a lot of yellow tea being produced. Never. There's always been a limited amount. And it's only in recent years, in fact, that more appears to be hitting the market than what's really produced. Now let's see, wait a minute. It appears that I said something contradictory. Yes, and I know everybody's thirsty. We'll start in just a second. Once I get through this contradiction, then we'll start. More on the market than is produced. Now, which acronym can describe this condition? LCS. Liars, cheaters, and scammers. That's the reason you have more on the market than is actually being produced. We'll talk about that later. The tea master is already walking towards me, which means that it's time for the actual production to start. And without further ado, let me bring in the numinous tea master, Xiaobei.
Yeah. My name is Xiaobei. Thank you. Yes. So we do yellow tea, huh? But I speak real. So people ask me in China, Bei, did you like a yellow tea? Oh, not my favorite, but I like it, I appreciate it. So okay, we do yellow tea. So this different now is the special. Special is the fancy cake, huh? Small, but I told you, my son learned. I do for him. Yeah.
So it comes in this small compressed format.
Yeah, but you cannot smell, huh? It's dry leaves. Okay, simple, easy.
And notice the tableau is what you would normally have for anything like a green or a white or a red tea. So 2 cups, and we're going to go through the same process. It's not exactly the same because we're actually going to do a rinse here. And the rinse, this 5-second rinse is really done to make the flavor, contrary to what you might think, it will end up brightening the flavor. Why would it brighten the flavor at a higher temperature? It's not so much that it's brightening the flavor, it's loosening the leaves so more of them get involved in producing the flavor. That's really what I mean. So instead of saying brightening, it would be fairer to say it's thickening the flavor. That's the fair thing to say about this.
这样告诉他们，先把水200度的水放到这个杯子里。
So you first put 200-degree water in your glass. You get a chance to feel what 200-degree water is. You don't need to really structure this. You need to heat the glass. So you put the little round in the glass, you shake it, and right away you'll be able to smell a little something. Oh, you smell a lot of something. And you're getting your 175-degree water ready so that after you do the rinse, you're going to, is that too, oh, that you use 200, okay. She actually drew 200 from the other spigot. I didn't realize that. Put it on, and for 5 or so seconds, counting in her head, this is a very long 5 seconds.
Is it not breaking?
Because she didn't break it up. That's why it actually went to 20 seconds. And she's structuring the water. This is the 175. And she's going to pour on the side. We'll set the timer. 3 minutes. I had temporary amnesia there. Good, and there's water in the other cup.
到底第一次要掰不了的话，一定要这么做，就是热水时间长一些，叫做融化。
So she reminds you that if you aren't able to break it up, do it like she just demonstrated it.
我是用这个。
So usually when we're serving it here, we have a tool that can break it up.
Yeah, I can use.
But that may not be convenient for you at home.
Yeah.
All right, so this has a 3-minute steep to it. And let's go ahead and continue the process of how you really make this tea. Yes.
One moment. So for a whole cake that's unbroken apart, it's about 20 seconds at
Yes.
200 degrees?
Yes.
Great.
Great. So the question was, for a whole one of these rounds, if you don't break it apart, you should use about 20 seconds at 200 degrees. And then discard the water, as you saw her do, and then put 175-degree water. And that opens the leaves enough so that it starts to extrude and gives you a thick enough flavor profile in the cup that you end up making. Yes.
Participant is thirsty for the LCS explanation.
Oh, okay. So this particular participant is looking for why LCSs have invaded this market. So you'll understand as you hear the explanation about, in quotes, sealing the yellow or suffocating the yellow. That process takes 3 days. If you just do all the other steps, so what are the other steps? You pick, you wither, you fry, you roll, and then you bake. You can get that all done within a 24 to 30 hour window. And then you can package it and you're free to go. So it is 1 day less than 3 to 4 days? The answer is yes. So if you only have 1 day's worth of work and you don't have the storage issues, you don't have to buy the special paper or bamboo to wrap the tea, it's much, much cheaper. And then if you accidentally on the package just write yellow process, the consumers expect to pay more. They expect to pay a lot more because consumers in the know understand that this is a very complicated process. All right, timer is, the time has arrived. And you're going to separate the round or the tea leaves from the tea liquor. Remembering to return the round back to the original glass because you're going to have a couple more steeps out of this. Really good steeps, as a matter of fact. And this tea will just get richer and richer. Take a look at the color. So you remember when you saw Siren Song, yes, it had a hint of yellow, but look at this thing. This thing is fully yellow. No mistake about it. All right, so let's go through the quality arena. So what do we do first? We look at this round. We smell this thing. Oh my gosh. Sure as heck smells different from Siren Song. It looks different too. Color of the leaves is different. Maybe that's just an illusion. Let's taste this. Let's see what this thing tastes like. Remember, this is first about how it feels in the mouth. So you're looking at astringency, you're looking at density, you're looking at aftertaste, and you're looking at energetics. So let's go ahead and do that. So you're taking 175-degree sip. So it's a little bit more than you would take for a oolong tea or for a fully fermented tea because it's not as hot. So I took my first taste or sip and am now trying to think about how it feels in the mouth. I'm going to take a second one. Okay, I have a pretty good idea from a quality arena perspective of what I detect. The energetics, by the way, may or may not come to you quickly. And don't worry, if the first couple sips, there are no energetics, not a problem. By the time you're down a little bit further, you will definitely feel energetics with this particular tea. All right, so it's your turn to brew. So Tea Master will brew with you. All right, and so remember you have 2 different temperatures of water ready, a 200-degree water And if you break it, if you're able to break up, and just in half, by the way, it doesn't need to be in small pieces. In fact, you don't want it in small pieces. You want it in half. If you're unable or don't have equipment to do that, don't worry. You'll actually pre-soak at 200 degrees for 20 to 30 seconds. And you'll get roughly the same results, so don't worry. All right, so the tea master is getting the water ready at right temperature. Ours is pre-programmed, so we already know it's the right temperature. She pours it out of the eventual recipient glass.
So it's broken.
She broke her second one into 2 pieces. So this is going to be a shorter rinse. So instead of 20 seconds, she's going to do it for 5 seconds because she broke it. So if you broke it, it'll be 5 seconds. If you didn't, it'll be 20 seconds. Remember, you discard the rinse. And then you're going to add 175 degree water.
So we just like tea sometimes.
So remember, you're going to structure the water a little bit to dissipate the steam. And then you'll add it to the round. You'll set the timer for 3 minutes. And go ahead and start. Okay, so what about this step after you roll that's called suffocating the yellow or seeding the yellow? What's really going on in this step? Every yellow tea is slightly different, but the general rules are as follows. You're going to, the farmer will wrap the tea in small batches in either a cloth or paper or bamboo. No exceptions to this. How long and how many times you wrap it depends on where you're making the yellow tea. On Junshan Island, you do it for a full 72 hours. In this particular area, you do it between 60 and 72 hours. And you add a further step when you're doing this tea. You steam it a couple times. So all of this is driven to create a certain result. What is the scientific result of, in quotes, seeding the yellow? Does seeding the yellow mean that the leaves will always become very yellow? Answer is no. Last week, you know for sure that that's not the case because siren song, they're not very yellow. In fact, they're hardly yellow at all, but they've still undergone this process. Is it to change the internal components of the tea leaves? And the answer is absolutely yes. So what goes on when you go through this process? You oxidize mostly the catechins and they change into other substances. Some of those substances are other polyphenols. So you actually do produce some theaflavins in this. And that's one of the outcomes of this that creates a mellow flavor. The time that you're going through this process, and let's review this process again. You wrap it in 1 pound or 2 pound bags. You put it in a room where the humidity is controlled. Sometimes you will steam the leaves at some point during this process, and you control the heat in this room. So in this room, ideally, it should be between about 110, I said this incorrectly. The heat of the tea leaf should be between 110 and about 115. Okay. Timer is done. You separate the leaves from the round, from the tea liquor.
The dry leaves smell clean and bright. Some cream that's even in the den.
The dry leaves smell clean and bright. They do smell clean and bright. Wonder what these wet leaves smell like. Clean and brighter. Cleaner and brighter. So to continue with this process, when you have them stored in this humidity and temperature controlled room, what you're trying to do is create oxidation. The conditions for an oxidation that is not the same as the oxidation or the denaturing. I'm saying this incorrectly. So you're trying to create an oxidation. That for sure is what you're trying to do. What is the end product that you're trying to create? You're trying to create a mellowness in the flavor and some other slight sweetness in the flavor as well. Yes.
Once the leaves got wet, I noticed the smell became much more sweet.
Yes. The leaves wet equals a much sweeter smell.
Found a hint of chocolate in the malt scent of the rinsed tea.
A hint of chocolate in the rinsed tea.
And the maltiness.
And the maltiness, thank you, in the rinsed tea. So again, as you're going through this process of, in quotes, sealing the yellow is an oxidation process designed to affect the taste. The process of frying, and by the way, I didn't tell you, but here's the key thing to remember. The frying is shorter and less hot than it would be for a green tea. So that affects the aroma, and the sealing the yellow affects the taste.
At first, I thought the wet leaves had an umami smell to them, but now I'm starting to get the maltiness and the sweetness.
Okay, great. So at first, this commentator noted an umaminess to the wet leaves, but then now is really getting that maltiness and sweetness.
I find the flavor to be robust.
Ah.
A hint of sweetness, which reminds me of some of the ones.
So this commentator finds the flavor robust with a hint of sweetness, almost reminiscent of oolongs. Now I'm going to stop everybody right there for a second, because again, in the Encyclopedia of Information, you have some people classifying yellow teas right next to oolongs. That's an incorrect classification because the steps are so different. However, your comment just now is fine. Because you didn't classify it as a oolong, but you said it's got a robustness to it, and absolutely okay.
I seem to smell a hint of mushrooms in the broth.
A hint of mushrooms is this commentator smells in the broth. And so be careful, because this commentator didn't say in the taste of it, but in the smell of the broth. And I get that, because there is a slight hint of woodsiness, almost like a mushroom, in the smell of the broth, but not in the taste.
smooth, light thickness around the flavor. Sorry, smooth plus light thickness and around flavor.
Smooth plus light thickness, is that,
Mhm.
and a round flavor. There really is a round flavor to this. And when you have properly gotten the leaves ready, this is why you get that round flavor. If you had not rinsed it, it would have been too light for most of you. You wouldn't have gotten this roundness of this flavor. So that's what the rinse did for you.
Mouthfeel is thick and syrupy to me, nice and smooth.
Mouthfeel is thick and syrupy, nice and smooth. So we're beginning to hear some themes here. Sweet, malty, round, syrupy, smooth. These things constitute a yellow tea in general. Good yellow teas, well done yellow teas, will have that mellowness, will have that smoothness, and that's what, in quotes, sealing the yellow really is. You see experts on the internet talk about sealing the yellow, meaning that the leaf comes out bright yellow like a daffodil. That's false. It's really about the process that's going on within the leaves themselves. Last week, you experienced that process without seeing huge yellow in the leaves. In fact, very little yellow. Yeah.
Another participant gets cooling throughout the mouth about halfway in the cup.
Another participant cooling in the mouth with what? Halfway through the cup? Halfway through the cup. And I love this comment because I picked up that cooling even faster. And to me, that is an important element of this tea. And again, I sense this in a different way than most other teas. So this is not like a white tea cooling or a green tea cooling. This is specific and it's driven by this, in quotes, sealing the yellow.
Also, the cooling lingers for this person after sipping, but in a good way.
For this person, the cooling lingers, me too, after the sipping.
Very smooth, viscous, no astringency, and another person says they get a sensation on the side of the tongue. Not sure yet if it's a flavor.
Very smooth, viscous,
And
and
a tongue sensation for somebody else on the side of the tongue.
and a tongue sensation on the side of the tongue that's non-specific to flavor.
And somebody else is also getting another more sensation on the tongue, sides, tip. Not sure about flavor.
Sensations on the tongue, sides and tip. And by the way, if you asked me what these sensations were, how I would describe it is a very, very light astringency. What it tells you is that this isn't leaves from some plant that isn't Camellia sinensis. We're still in the Camellia sinensis family. It's true that this yellowing and sealing the yellow, a process, is creating this because you really don't quite get anything like this in any other style.
Easy swallow, warming to the core.
Easy swallow, warming to the core. So this is an energetics, warming to the core. Absolutely warming to the core. And from an alleged health perspective, part of this is, well, let's see. Here's what happens scientifically, and then we'll talk about the alleged health perspective. What happens scientifically is a changing of the catechins into other compounds, including a lot of enzymes. And these enzymes seem to have favorable performance in the liver, or seem to be very helpful in the liver. The Chinese and the Japanese, and for the first time this week, I picked up an article out of China talking about this, relating it to these specific enzymes that are produced through this, in quotes, sealing the yellow process.
The scent of the tea liquor is very subtle. I can almost imagine it smells like freshly rinsed fruit, but it's not fruity.
The sensation of the tea liquor, the tea leaves, almost,
The scent of the
oh,
tea
the
is
scent, okay,
very subtle.
is very subtle. It's not fruity, but I suspect that the commentator is thinking about the color and thinking about the subtleness and thinking, how do I describe this if I don't say fruity? And that's a really good question. And that's why, again, as we touch the various things we've said, so sweet, malty, brown, viscous, no astringency, easy to swallow, cooling. These are all qualities of this particular tea. All right, so this is so different than Siren Song. Siren Song is from a different area, different province, right? Siren Song's from Montclair. So their process of doing the yellow doesn't include 2 steaming portions during the seeding the yellow. This has 2 steaming portions. And by portions, what I mean is twice during that 72 hours, they will steam the tea leaves. And that leads to, as far as we can tell, this really, really nice, it accentuates this really, really nice sweetness that this has. This is clearly sweeter than the Siren Song. And this doesn't have that almost buttery, almost like corn flavor that Siren Song has. And so that's really what I wanted to accentuate in going through these 2, because I want you to know yellow tea is not one flavor. We have demonstrated in these last 2 weeks a range of what the flavors could be. And there's others also, yes.
Maybe a hint of wet, dried fruit in the liquor aroma.
Maybe a hint of wet, dry fruit in the liquor aroma.
And the flavor has a gentleness.
Flavor has a gentleness to it. I love the fact that we keep coming back to smooth, gentle, syrupy, sweet, malty, over and over and over again. Even the comment about maybe a hint of fruitiness in the liquor, if you change that fruity to honey lime, I would be 110% aboard, because, and again, remembering that we all detect scents differently. So I didn't just say that you were wrong. You're within the guardrails. For me, I would change it to honey lime, but I accept where that fruitiness is coming from.
It's very different and quite different from veil.
Ah, very different and quite different from veiled. Veiled is another yellow tea, by the way. And veiled is definitely very different. Embraced is extremely different. So what we're giving you, again, is an introduction to the fact that yellow tea isn't one size fits all. Every varietal, every farmer who's doing it is doing it differently. And the differences all reflect in a final outcome. All of them, in some way, if they're not in the LCS camp, are sealing the yellow. And that's what makes these teas so interesting. They're easy on the system. Why again? Because they're changing the nature of the catechin. Remember, ECGC, the main catechin of green tea, for some people ends up nauseating if they're eating on drinking on an empty stomach. That's changed by the time you get to yellow tea. Yellow tea you can have on empty stomach all day long, and you won't be nauseated. Yes.
This is delicious tea. The sweetness is very slight, and it comes in the aftertaste for me, which makes me think I need to drink it very slowly to fully enjoy all its flavors.
So this commentator is talking about tea rhythm. And I'm glad you brought that up because the commentator notes there is a sweetness in the aftertaste. However, there is that sense that to accentuate, you need to drink slowly so that you really get it. And that's really true. Yellow teas, and you saw this last week in Siren Song. In Siren Song, if you had gulped down that tea in under a minute, you could have done that because it was cool enough to do it. And then I ask you, well, talk to me about the tea. You wouldn't have been able to tell me much. And it would have been the same with this. Oh, this is so good. You'd have said, oh, it's really good. A little sweet, really good. But you wouldn't have been able to tell me much. By drinking it slowly, you see all the elements which make it really good. Yes.
Siren Song tasted like a closer relative to green tea than this old gold test.
Siren Song tasted like a closer relative to green tea than old gold dust. I love this comment. Remembering, of course, what I already mentioned, that old gold underwent 2 steamings during the course of its process. So completely changed the nature. Look at the color of this. The color of this is what, if you only read the internet, you would associate with yellow tea because the color is yellow brownish. Last week with Siren Song, it was greenish, but it had gone through the same steps, except they didn't do the steaming. And the number of hours that they actually did the sealing the yellow was fewer. Yeah.
Is the tea liquor supposed to be more yellow than Siren Song, almost a light amber?
Yes. So the questioner says, did I make my tea correctly? Because mine is more yellow than Siren Song. Is that the way it's supposed to be? And the answer is absolutely yes. Look at this thing. Last week, it was green tinged with yellow. Where's the green here? There's no green here. This is just yellow. And that's the way it's supposed to be. And look at these leaves. These leaves are this yellow brownish color. Okay. Ahead of schedule, a rarity. So this area also produces golden disc. You haven't tried golden disc today, but it's a even sweeter, heavier form of the old gold. And that there were only 1,000 of those cakes made. And by the way, the old gold isn't made every year. So we got this in a year that it was made. And this last year we looked to see if they had made it, and they didn't. Part of the issue this year is only the very first pick in China got done in a way where they were able to produce great tea. Every other pick after that very first pick has been a mess this year. And all of that has to do with the various policies that China is using right now. And as a result, people aren't getting out to the fields the way that they might ordinarily be out in the fields. They're not able to take care of the tea bushes in the same way that they would. Even in more remote places, it's not coming in correctly. There's 2 issues. One, there's an administrative issue. And then secondly, there's the issue of weather, because there's some unusual weather patterns occurring. But like I said, the first pick is in great shape. You will see, as every other tea purveyor is seeing, and as tea customers all over the world are seeing, a shortage of Chinese tea hitting the market. Orders are not able to be fulfilled now because they're just not getting them in yet. And what they are getting in just isn't reaching up to the quality that you normally would expect from Chinese teas. So far, in this first crop that we have, we got really superior stuff. In fact, the first 2 orders will be that very first stuff that was picked. We'll have to see with the cliff teas. What we're told out of Fujian, and we've talked to several of the farmers, is that those are coming through just fine, and that the families are pitching together. And because that's a more isolated place, they can do that and actually accomplish harvest. So far with what we do, we're not expecting any major problems with the tea.
Are those trichomes settling at the bottom of the cup?
Yes, so the questioner asked, wow, they go through this whole process and they leave trichomes on? And the answer is yes. These leaves, when you go out to the tea fields, they're very distinctively on the leaves. These particular varietals in this area, and I'm talking the Yueyang area, do have considerable trichomes on it.
A participant finds that it's interesting how the color, it looks amber when looking at the tea from above, but more of a light gold when looking at it from the side. She found Siren Song to be a more uniform color throughout.
This is an interesting comment. Commentator says that in evaluating Siren Song versus Old Gold, the color was more uniform in Siren Song. In Old Gold, it looks a certain way. Amber, when you look from the top, it looks more yellowish when you look from the side. And I definitely classify this from my perspective, the way my eyes see this, as definitely light yellow, but clearly yellow and not green. Great. Well, looks like we're going to end a little early today, which is not a problem. Your comments were great. And I'm really happy that you took such good notes with Siren Song and were able to make these comparisons, because that really helps you understand what you're looking at when you get yellow tea from anywhere. If you can verify that it's yellow tea, then it should fit in this range, somewhere in this range of what you've tasted of these last 2 weeks. Yes.
Is this tea available by the ounce or by the piece?
This tea, the questioner asked, is it available by the ounce or the piece? It's available by the ounce. So next week, we go to red, and we go to a tea called Luscious. Be a great session next week. Thank you very much for all your commentary this week. Look forward to seeing everybody next week. Remember, this is a difficult period as we're going through more COVID. So please take care of yourselves and look forward to seeing you next week. Bye-bye now.
Bye.